Betrayal, loss, and unanswered questions collide in a story that will grip your heart from the first page. Quang faces ruthless debt collectors after a disastrous stock market gamble, leaving his mother homeless and forcing her to rely on Linda's kindness. Meanwhile, Linda is confronted by her manipulative ex-husband, who claims Quang has abandoned her after a tragic miscarriage. Torn between doubt and hope, she must decide whether to trust her heart or the cruel words she's been told. Dive into this emotional journey, witness love tested by hardship, and subscribe now to follow every twist of Quang and Linda's story. The rain that afternoon was relentless, drumming against the tin rooftops and pooling in the narrow alley where Quang stood, his back pressed against the damp wall. The gray sky hung low, as though it, too, bore the weight of his misfortunes. His shirt clung uncomfortably to his skin, not from the rain but from the cold sweat that had been gathering since morning. Every muscle in his body was tense. He could already hear the sound of heavy boots splashing through puddles before he saw them, two men, broad-shouldered, their faces hard and unreadable. They moved with the slow, deliberate steps of predators who knew their prey had nowhere left to run. "Where's the money, Quang?" one of them growled, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the rain. The other cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing in the confined space like a warning. Quang swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the ground. He couldn't look at them, not when shame burned hotter than fear in his chest. Just months ago, he'd been full of plans, grand visions of turning borrowed money into a fortune through the stock market. Every chart, every news headline, every late-night calculation had seemed to promise the same thing, that success was just one smart trade away. He'd told himself it was for his mother, to give her the comfort she deserved after years of sacrifice. But now, all those colorful numbers on his phone screen had turned into a black hole, swallowing everything. The market had crashed faster than he could react. One bad day became a bad week, and soon the margin calls began. His attempts to recover only dug the hole deeper. The money was gone, every last dong, and with it went the deed to the only home his mother had ever known. He could still see her earlier that morning, standing in the middle of the living room with her hands trembling as she folded clothes into an old suitcase. The house looked hollow without the framed photographs and the potted plants she had tended for years. The walls, once warm with the scent of her cooking, now smelled faintly of dust and emptiness. Her eyes, red from crying, met his for a brief moment, and in them, Quang saw both love and quiet devastation. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't blamed him. That silence hurt more than any accusation could have. Outside, the landlord's men had waited, their impatience thinly veiled. Papers were signed, keys handed over, and just like that, the place that had held their memories became someone else's property. Now, standing in the alley with the debt collectors blocking his only way out, Quang felt the last thread of his pride unravel. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead, the cold seeping into his bones. He thought of his mother's uncertain future, how she'd quietly told him she would go stay with Linda, the woman who had always treated her kindly, offering her tea and conversation whenever she visited. It was a relief, in a way, that she wouldn't be alone, yet the thought also filled him with guilt. Linda didn't deserve to be dragged into this mess. One of the men stepped closer, the smell of tobacco and damp leather heavy in the air. "We're not asking again," he said. Quang's lips parted, but no words came out. There was nothing to say, no promise he could make that wouldn't be a lie. All he had left was time, and even that, he suspected, was running out. Linda was in the middle of clearing a small pile of laundry from the couch when the sharp knock came. The sound startled her. It was too forceful to be casual, the kind of knock that carried intent. For a moment, she hesitated, the folded shirt in her hands forgotten. Rain tapped against the window, the dim light of the afternoon casting long shadows in the small apartment. She wiped her hands on her jeans, crossed the room, and unlocked the door. Her breath caught. Standing in the doorway was a man she had thought she'd erased from her life, her ex-husband. The years hadn't softened his sharp features. If anything, the fine lines etched around his eyes only made him look more calculating. His suit was perfectly pressed despite the wet weather, and the faint scent of cologne clung to him, familiar yet unwelcome. "Linda," he said, with a voice that seemed to carry both feigned warmth and hidden barbs. "We need to talk." She wanted to shut the door right then, but something in his expression, half pity, half superiority, made her freeze. He stepped inside without waiting for her invitation, his gaze sweeping over the modest apartment as if evaluating it. She crossed her arms, a defensive barrier between them. "I'll get straight to the point," he said, his eyes locking on hers. "You need to forget about Quang." The name hit her like a stone to the chest. She stiffened, but he pressed on, his words deliberate, almost rehearsed. "I know what happened," he continued, his tone dipping into something softer, as though he were offering comfort. "I know you lost the baby. And I know he left you because of it. Don't fool yourself, men like him don't stick around when things get hard. That's why you haven't seen him for over a month." Linda felt the air leave her lungs. The memory of that day, waking up in the sterile white of a hospital room, the empty ache in her body, the nurse's apologetic eyes, flashed before her. She had waited for Quang then, convinced he would walk through the door at any moment. But the hours became days, and the days became weeks, and the silence had grown heavier than the grief itself. Her ex-husband took a slow step closer, lowering his voice as if speaking in intimate truth. "You think he's busy?" "No, Linda. He's gone. Just like I knew he would. I've been right about him all along." She gripped the edge of the counter behind her, her knuckles turning white. Part of her wanted to scream at him to leave, to take his poison-laced words and disappear. But another part, one she hated, hesitated. Because buried in the anger was doubt. And doubt, she knew, was far more dangerous than anger. The rain outside intensified, the steady drumming filling the silence that stretched between them. Her ex-husband's eyes softened into something almost tender, but she knew it was an act. She had once loved those eyes, once believed they held sincerity. Now, all she could see was the manipulation behind them. "I'm telling you this because I don't want to see you waste any more of your life on someone who's already abandoned you," he said, reaching out as if to touch her arm. She stepped back. The movement was small, but it was enough to draw an almost imperceptible smirk to his lips, as though he confirmed her vulnerability. When he finally turned to leave, he paused at the doorway, his silhouette framed by the gray wash of rain. "Think about what I said," he murmured before stepping into the storm. The door clicked shut, leaving Linda alone in the quiet hum of her apartment. Her heart was still racing, her mind replaying every word, each one threatening to chip away at the trust she held for Quang. Somewhere deep inside, she still wanted to believe in him, but belief was starting to feel like a luxury she couldn't afford. After the door clicked shut, the apartment felt smaller, the shadows longer, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on Linda. The faint smell of rain and damp earth lingered in the air, a reminder that the storm outside hadn't yet passed, just like the storm raging inside her. She sank onto the edge of the couch, her hands trembling slightly as she buried her face in them. Every word her ex-husband had spoken echoed relentlessly in her mind. "He left you. He's gone. Forget him." Part of her wanted to scream, to throw something against the walls, to physically eject the pain he had stirred up. But that anger was tangled with something far more complicated, doubt. How could she reconcile the memory of Quang, his gentle hands, his quiet reassurances, the way he had always made her feel safe, with the narrative her ex-husband had so meticulously woven? A month had passed since she last saw him, a month filled with unanswered messages, missed calls, and an aching silence that had gnawed at her heart. She had tried to convince herself that Quang had his reasons, that life had forced him away, yet now, his absence felt like a betrayal she couldn't fully understand. Her thoughts drifted back to the small, damp alley where Quang had confronted the debt collectors, to the storm that had mirrored his despair. She remembered the way his body had tensed, the way he had avoided their eyes, and she felt a pang of both pride and sorrow. Pride for the man who had silently carried so much weight, sorrow for the helplessness she had felt, unable to reach him in time. And now, with the seed of doubt planted by her ex-husband, she was trapped in a maze of questions with no clear exit. The rain outside intensified, hammering the windows in relentless rhythm, as if the universe itself were amplifying her inner turmoil. She closed her eyes and let herself sink deeper into memory, the quiet moments, the shared laughter, the fleeting touches that had once filled her with warmth. Could all of that have been real if he had truly abandoned her? Or had she been deceiving herself, clinging to a hope that no longer existed? A single tear escaped from the corner of her eye and slid down her cheek. Linda swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. Her body ached from grief, but her mind refused to surrender. Somewhere, deep within, a small, stubborn voice whispered that she couldn't let someone else decide the story of her life, not even her ex-husband. She had loved Quang with a depth she had never felt before, and she owed it to herself to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. She rose from the couch, moving to the window, pressing her palms against the cool glass as she stared at the rain-slicked streets below. Each drop seemed to mirror her own uncertainty, relentless, uncontrollable, yet strangely cleansing. She imagined Quang somewhere out there, burdened by debt and shame, perhaps avoiding her not because of her ex-husband's narrative but because of forces beyond his control. The thought made her chest tighten, but it also sparked a quiet determination. "I have to know," she whispered to herself, the words barely audible above the rain. "I have to find him, whatever it takes." For the first time in weeks, a sense of purpose began to take root amid the storm in her heart. Doubt still lingered, but it no longer had the power to paralyze her. Linda straightened, her shoulders squared, her eyes reflecting a mix of fear and resolve. She knew that confronting the truth would not be easy. She would face disappointment, betrayal, or perhaps even truths she wasn't ready to accept. But remaining passive, letting someone else dictate the story of her life, was no longer an option. As the rain began to taper into a soft drizzle, Linda pulled on her coat and stepped away from the window. Each step felt deliberate, a movement toward action rather than despair. The city outside glimmered faintly under the wet asphalt, and though it was still shrouded in gray, it held the promise of clarity. She would find Quang, and in doing so, she would reclaim her heart from the shadows of doubt and lies.
Hello, xin chào tất cả các khán giả của kênh Lý Tưởng Ninja Review. Tập ngày hôm nay rất vui khi được gặp lại các khán giả.